Fun channel. Here's Jiaxuan. Today we would like to discuss about Vote 18, which was a long-standing policy in the UK and was one of the long-awaited electoral reforms for Malaysia. First, what is an electoral system? An electoral system is the method and rules whereby the votes of citizens determine the selection of executives and legislators. These rules govern all aspects of the voting process, including when elections occur, who is allowed vote, who can stand as a candidate, how ballots are marked and cast, how votes translate in selection outcome, and other factors that can affect the result. Some electoral systems elect a single winner to a unique position, for instance, Prime Minister, Governor, or President, while others elect multiple winners such as Members of Parliament or Boards of Directors. There are 5 types of election in the UK. Elections to the House of Commons of the United Kingdom, commonly called general elections when all seats are contested, elections to devolved parliaments and assemblies, local elections, mayoral elections, and Police and Crime Commissioner elections. In Malaysia, elections are held to select the 222 members of the Dewan Rakyat and the 576 members of the 13 states legislative assemblies. As we know, the power to govern is conferred from the electorate to the government, and government is called to account. An electoral system ensures 4 principles: full franchise subject to limited restrictions, value of every vote is equal, conduct of election campaign is regulated to ensure legality and fairness, and sufficient democratic support for both legislative body and government to ensure effectiveness. A parliament shall only have continuance for 5 years. Although in theory the dissolution of parliament lay within the prerogative of the Crown, the Prime Minister used to control the timing of general elections. The eligibility to vote in the UK comprises of be registered to vote, at least 18 years old, be a British, Irish or qualifying Commonwealth citizen, be resident at an address in the UK, or a UK citizen living abroad who has been registered to vote in the UK, not be legally excluded from voting, not a member of the House of Lords, not a convicted person detained in pursuance of their sentences, not guilty within the previous 5 years of corrupt or illegal practices in connection with election, and not detained under certain sections of Mental Health Act 1983. On the other hand, one will be able to vote in Malaysia if he is a Malaysian citizen, he is at least 18 years old, he is living in a constituency where he wished to vote, he have registered to vote, not of unsound mind or serving a prison sentence, not convicted in any part of the Commonwealth, and not sentenced to death or to a term of imprisonment of more than 12 months. Vernon Bodano has categorized the voting system under 3 heads, namely plurality system, majority system, and proportional system. They all differ widely, but there is no agreed criterion whereby one may be judged better than another. The simple majority system, also known as first past the post system, is applicable in the UK and some former British colonies including the US, Canada, India, as well as Malaysia. In each constituency, political parties will outforward one candidate as a prospective member of parliament. Each registered voter who chooses to vote out a cross on the ballot paper next to their chipset candidate. Once polling was closed, all the votes will be counted. The candidate who gains the largest number of votes in the election wins the seat and becomes an MP. For example, in 2010, Labour candidate Glenda Jackson won her seat in Hampstead and Kilburn with only 32.8% of the vote. Clearly, the proportion of votes cast for himself or his opponents is irrespective. This means that the candidate who wins may not obtain the majority of the total votes. How about the evolution of franchising in England and Malaysia? For further explanation, I'll pass it to Crystal.
Franchising is often thought of as a modern-day invention. Its origins can be traced to the expansion of the church and as an early method of central government control before the Middle Age. Historically, the purpose of commercial franchising was to allow workers or journeymen to establish their businesses supported by franchisors. The evolution of the franchise before the Reform Acts of 1832 and 1867, the right to vote was limited and based on rights in property. The 1832 Act, which is the Representation of the People Act, had increased the franchise by 50%, which still represented only 7% of the population, which means that only 7% of the population was voting in 1832. However, the Reform Act of 1867 doubled the number of people entitled to vote, which was 14% of the population voting in that year. The extension of the franchise in 1867 to skilled male laborers was not a matter greeted with universal approval. Walter Bagehot retorted, No one will contend that the ordinary working man who has no special skill and who is only rated because he has a house can judge much of intellectual matters. In 1867, in 1886, John Stuart Mill presented a petition to Parliament calling for the enfranchisement of women, to the giving of a right of privilege, especially the right to vote. Subsequently, the following year, the Manchester Women's Suffrage Committee was formed, soon to be united into a national committee based in London. When the Reform Bill was before Parliament, Mill introduced an amendment changing the word man to persons, thereby entitling women to vote. However, the amendment was defeated, which said it wasn't ready for women to vote yet at that time. There is a legal challenge to disenfranchisement that came in by citing the case Charlton against Links in 1868. It was argued before the Court of Common Pleas that the Representation of the People Act 1867 had conferred on women a right to vote. The argument focuses on the use of the word man in the Act. It was contended that Lord Brouham's Act, which stipulated that the word man includes women, applied to an interpretation of the Representation of the People Act. The court rejected such a view. To conclude, in this act, the word man means mankind, and both men and women are legally qualified to vote as a citizen. Nevertheless, the Representation of the People Act 1918, which implemented the conference proposals, introduced a full franchise of all men in parliamentary elections and conferred the right to vote in parliament on all women over the age of 30, who were either local government electors or the wives of local government electors. Full equality with men was delayed 10 years. Following 1948, a full franchise based on equality and respecting the principle of one person, one vote was finally achieved under the Representation of the People Act 1948, reaching true equality. The right to vote is defined in the Representation of the People Act 1983, before the enactment of the Representation of the People Act 2000. Eligibility was based solely on residency in a constituency and qualifying date. The 2000 Act introduced greater flexibility, allowing registration once a resident in a constituency at any date.
Now we understand the evolution of franchising in England and Malaysia. But what are the merits and demerits about Vote 18? Let's return to the voting site. Hi everyone, now I'm at the voting site located in Subang. Now I'm going to interview some voters about what their views on merits and demerits of Vote 18. Hi, what do you think about the merits of Vote 18?
Entitling voting rights to 18-year-old youngsters is always a controversial topic. For me personally, I think lowering down the voting age will increase the political interest of the youngster. Lowering the age to 18 will allow younger people to spark a passion for politics and also ignite an interest at an earlier age. Politicians always mourn about young people not being engaged in politics and having no interest at all. But if they are not allowed to vote, what would they care? If they are entitled to vote, they will try to understand the current political situation of their own country. If a person is not trying to learn about it, I don't think he will do so when he reaches the age to vote. Hence, this is one of the reasons why I think lowering down voting age is a good idea. Some people will also say that vast majority of 18-year-olds are not interested in politics. Although you might be surprised, it is true that the younger the demographic, the less of a chance of an individual voting. But is this a reason to deny them the right to vote? If 3 of your friends don't like chocolate, should that mean you are not allowed chocolate too? Secondly, I think that 18-year-olds have maturity. Some put forward the argument that 18-year-olds lack the maturity to vote, but you can join the army at this age, drive at 17, change your name and order your own passport. If you are capable of these responsibilities, then why shouldn't you be trusted to vote? If you can take on responsibilities such as those I mentioned just now, it arguably takes more responsibility than researching and understanding which political party you would like to vote for. Voters that were given the right to vote at 18 show higher levels of political trust and greater support for democracy than other voters. Similarly, Austrian voters at the age of 18 show greater levels of support for democracy, and external political efficacy than other voters. Furthermore, an increase in the overall political interest in the age group could also be observed. These findings are suggestive of a genuine benefit of lowering the voting age to 18. However, nuanced differences can be observed here as well. Research in Scotland has found that 18-year-olds in Scotland after enfranchisement had greater levels of several pro-civic attitudes compared with their unfranchised counterparts of the same age in the rest of the UK. The last merit I would like to carry out is that lowering down the voting age will reduce intergenerational disconnect. Many political decisions have long-lasting effects on younger generations, such as those related to the environment and public debt. Allowing 18-year-olds to vote can help bridge the gap between generations and ensure that the interests of young people are considered. That's all. Thank you.
Han, how about your view on the merits?
Well, the idea of lowering the voting age has sparked debates worldwide. Now I'm going to present on my perspective on the merits of lowering the voting age. First of all, there are critiques that youngsters or teenagers might be lacking of political interest, as politics is more salient to the 35 and 50 years old group, which is the parent age, compared to the youngsters like those under 20, as they may have insufficient life experience or exposure to various aspects of society such as employment, taxes, or managing finance. This limited exposure may restrict their understanding of the complexity of political issue and the potential consequences of their choices. Furthermore, they may not yet possess a strong inclination towards political affairs. This might affect the impute legitimacy of the young voters, where a significant portion of them will be less motivated to actively engage in researching or understanding political issues or participating effectively in elections. While apart from that, this might also lead to a shift in policy priorities, as youth now might have different perspectives, priorities and interests compared to the older demographics due to the information they receive or the level of education, which may conflict with the adult. Okay, so with limited interest towards political issue, it will be most probably that the young voters will have a limited knowledge regarding politics or the latest issue. They might not understand the electoral system that they are practicing or the issues and information that the candidates are trying to raise. Necessary knowledge like this, which regards the political systems, policy and their implication, may play a very important role, and even the procedure of voting in front of the ballot box matters in making informed voting decisions and prevent a misguided choice. While apart from that, the education system or the government also have to play a role in enforcing civic education in school to the youngsters, which could help them to develop a correct and sufficient understanding on the necessary knowledge and the importance of elections in order to develop a sense of commitment to democratic process. As now is an age of information explosion where things are more social today with online networks than ever before. They are exposed to more information with internet access than any other generation before them. However, having access to data is not the same as understanding it. With the complexity of the information received from internet or the lacking of experience dealing with elections, they might not have the ability to have a clear understanding and will have them guessing or being misled at who is a better candidate or which candidate will be a better presenter of their view. But lacking of political knowledge and understanding, it might undermine the value and effectiveness of their participation in the democratic process. This is at the same time also raised another issue where young voters are often being criticized to be lacking of maturity and sound decision-making abilities, which are vital for responsible voting. As they argue, individuals below a certain age such as 16 and 18 may not have fully developed these attributes, and it is contended that teenage or youth at this age might be more susceptible to impulsive or emotionally driven decision-making, potentially leading to less thoughtful and less informed voting choice without properly analyzing the pros and cons of every situation. Apart from that, lacking of maturity and life experience, or even sound judgment, the young voters might not have developed the necessary understanding of complex political issues, societal challenges, and long-term consequences of their decision, which might lead them to be easily influenced by radical information in social media or manipulated by political campaigns or maybe interest groups, which might target them through simplified message, emotional appeals, or misleading information. This tactic is often being used and is even being effective among the adults, which could potentially distort electoral outcomes and undermine the integrity of the election. Apart from that, according to a journal article by Ken L. Tedin, assessing peer and parents' influence and audiences' political attitudes, where young voters' attitude on politics may be influenced by peer and parent, where this influence can overshadow independent thinking and potentially shape the voting preferences of young individuals. This eventually raises questions on the autonomy and independent decision-making abilities of those young voters, which could potentially dilute the diversity of perspective and opinion within the electoral process. Moreover, lowering the voting age might also create inconsistency in age thresholds for various rights and responsibility, which may lead to challenges in maintaining a coherent legal framework. This could also undermine the clarity and consistency of legal standards when questions regarding age of individuals engaging in activity like serving on juries, purchasing like alcohol, or entering into contract arise. So in the conclusion, the collective effect of the demerit listed out above can result in a diminished electorate where it could be potentially lead to a high proportion of ill-informed, impulsive or manipulated votes, compromising the legitimacy and comprehensive of the democratic process, which might eventually lowers the quality of the vote. However, all of this is on argumentative grounds whereby equipping young voters with necessary tools and skills, the potential demerits can be mitigated, leading to an inclusive and informed electorate. So that's my view. Thank you.
Alright, thank you for sharing views with us. Now we have met up with two lawyers, Ms. Chia and Ms. Tan, to discuss about what reforms can be made in the position of England and Malaysia respectively. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Ms. Chia, in your opinion, what are the reforms can be made in England?
Hi, this is Claire. Before we look into the suggestion on reforms on the English position, let me brief you through the current voting system in the UK. First past the post is the electoral system used to elect members of parliament to the House of Commons. It is a pluralist electoral system in which the winning candidate only needs one vote more than their leading opponent in order to win their seat. However, throughout the years, this system is being highly criticized due to several reasons. One of the main criticisms of FPTP is that it is disproportionate. On this account, an electoral system should make sure that a party's level of support is reflected in the number of seats they win. First past the post, however, does not produce a distribution of seats that reflects the overall way in which votes have been cast across the country. Parties that receive less than half of the total UK vote regularly win a majority of seats in the House of Commons. Detractors say this means that under FPTP, the legislative chamber fails to reflect and represent the public's political preferences and awards unearned majorities to one of two main parties. The first reform that we would like to suggest is that proportional representation voting system can be used instead of the FPTP system. It is the principle behind a number of electoral systems to ensure that the outcome of the election reflects the proportion of support gained by each completing group. PR contrasts to the majoritarian principle that underpins FPTP system, where whichever party or candidate obtains a plurality of votes within any given constituency wins that contest outright. Similarly, there are a number of different systems based on PR. A simple party-list PR system is used in the UK for the European Parliament. A different additional member system is used to elect the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly. There are several important differences, and the principle of proportionality is applied quite differently between the two. The single transferable vote system is used to elect the district councils and the MEPs in Northern Ireland and the local government council in Scotland. By having this reform, wasted votes can be reduced. FPTP can lead to a significant number of wasted votes where a voter's choice does not result in the election of a candidate. This occurs when a candidate wins a constituency with less than 50% of the vote, or when a candidate receives significantly more votes than needed to win a seat. PR reduces the number of wasted votes because votes for smaller parties or independent candidates are not lost. Instead, they contribute to the overall allocation of seats based on the party's shares of the vote, ensuring that a larger portion of electorate's preferences are represented in the legislature. Next, the second reform is to use alternative vote system, AV, which has come closest to becoming the alternative for UK elections. Legislation to implement AV was even passed by the House of Commons in 1918 as part of the Representation of the People Act, but was blocked by the House of Lords. And it was AV again in 2011 that was the subject of a referendum on changing the vote system, which was defeated 68% to 32% with a turnout of 42%. AV is used in House of Representatives elections in Australia, for example, while the similar supplementary vote was until recently used in elections in UK. The AV system involves voters ranking candidates in a constituency in order of preference. The voters are then tallied, and if no candidate has won an outright majority of first preference votes, the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated and the second preference of each ballot cast for that candidate is counted. This repeats until one candidate wins an outright majority, and the SV system is similar, but voters only mark a first and second preference. If no candidate win an outright majority of the preference, the top two candidates enter a runoff where voters' second ballots are counted, but only if their first preference did not make the runoff and their second preference did. AV remedies the issue of wasted ballots under FPTP and allows voters to cast ballots for their preferred candidate even if they are unlikely to win the election. However, supplementary vote gives voters two options but does not guarantee that their vote will count in the runoff. However, this system is not entirely running well as parties can still win far more or fewer seats in parliament than their share of the vote. Analysis has shown that in the UK, AV could have produced even more disproportionate outcome in 2015 general election than FPTP. To solve this issue, the Jenkins Commission, an independent commission set up by the Labour government in 1997 to examine alternatives to FPTP, recommended that a system they call AV Plus be used. This would work much like the AV system, but with 50 to 20% of seats in parliament coming from these votes. This is similar to multi-member proportional or additional member system, but unlike these systems, the proportional and constituency elements would be counted separately, with no relationship between the seats allocated through each method. Now I'll pass it to Kersing to explain about the reforms under Malaysian position.
Thank you, Ms. Chia. How about the reforms in Malaysia?
Thank you, Jiaxuan. Malaysia is one of the only democracies in Southeast Asia which continues use a first-past-the-post electoral system, which means the party or coalition that wins 112 seats, the number needed for a simple majority in the 222-seat lower house of parliament, will form a government. The 40th general election GE14 turned out to be momentous for democracy in Malaysia. On 9th of May 2018, the rule of the once invisible Barisan Nasional was brought to an end, and a peaceful transition of power was made to a new coalition government under the 93-year-old Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. With the change, Malaysia entered a political environment with new possibilities for democratic and electoral reforms. In Malaysia, elections are held at both the federal and state levels. Elections for the Dewan Rakyat, the lower house of parliament, take place at federal level. On the other hand, state-level elections are held for positions in each of the 13 Malaysian states' state legislative assembly, which represent the legislative arm of state governance. The primary proposal for elections reform following GE14 is to implement a new electoral system. Moving from the first-past-the-post systems to a more proportional one should be taken into consideration. This will allow for healthy competition amongst coalition partners, foster national unity and centrism, and better represent Malaysia's diverse population in parliament. Many minority ethnic groups such as the Chinese, Orang Asli or Asal, and Indians are finding it more and more difficult to see members of their community elected in an environment where the majority of electoral wards are Malay. This is because of the first-past-the-post and continued reliance on ethnic lines for voting. In addition to guaranteeing equitable representation for all groups, a new voting system needs to discourage identity politics. Furthermore, expand voting rights to a broader range of Malaysians. The Pakatan Harapan government should fulfill its promise to lower the voting age from 21 to 18. A two-thirds majority is, however, required in Parliament to amend Article 119, subsection 1. The reformist Pakatan Harapan administration was deposed by an internal coup just 20 months after GE14. While the reforms were not abandoned, the two subsequent administrations did not pursue them with dedication. However, three key breakthroughs occurred: the reduction of the voting age, Undi 18, automatic voter registration, and anti-hoping law. GE15 was the first since the implementation of the Constitutional Amendment Act 2019, which saw the voting age lowered to 18 alongside the automatic registration of anyone eligible to vote. As a result, there were almost 7 million new voters this GE15, increasing the number of voters to over 21 million in comparison to GE14, where there were 14.9 million voters. With the Gazette of the Undi 18 bill that allows all Malaysians aged 18 and above to vote, the electoral roll will automatically include the names of those who are eligible to cast ballots in the country's elections. There is no longer a need to go to the Election Commission's office or register yourself at mobile booths. Malaysians who were 18 years old and above as of December 31, 2021 should be automatically included in the electoral roll if they were not already registered. Malaysia's new anti-hopping law went into effect on 5th of October 2022. The law was designed to combat party hopping, as evidenced by the Sheraton move. which brought down the elected Pakatan Harapan government. Since 1961, partying has been a big issue in Malaysia. While there is general agreement that the law is a positive development, there is a huge loophole in which parties who cross the aisle are not punished, by still allowing parties to move as a bloc. This law was designed to enable post-election coalitions to be formed, especially when there are no clear winners, as was the case in GE15. The current government in Malaysia stands in stark contrast to its predecessors in several significant ways. Historically, Malaysian governments were predominantly formed by a single coalition, such as the Barisan Nasional, or through the collaboration of multiple coalitions with similar ideologies, like the BN and the Perikatan Nasional. However, the present government represents a unique departure from this tradition. It has emerged through negotiations and cooperation among former political rivals, driven by the electoral outcome and the King's Decree. This government, unlike previous administration, is a diverse coalition, including the participation of the Pakatan Harapan, Barisan Nasional, GPS, GRS, MUDA, and several smaller parties. Notably, the Perikatan Nasional is the only coalition that chose not to be part of this government. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing this, Tan. The constitutional significance of the electorate voting in elections has been recognized by Article 3, Protocol Number 1 of the European Convention. The high contracting parties undertake to hold free elections at reasonable intervals by secret ballot under conditions which will ensure the free expression of the opinion of the people in the choice of the legislature. In conclusion, the constitutional significance of the electoral system consists of: firstly, it alters the constitutional balance between the executive and the House of Commons in favor of the former at the expense of the latter. In particular, with a commanding majority of seats in its favor, it will be very unlikely for such a government to be defeated on its proposed legislation. Secondly, it will be very unlikely that a government would suffer a defeat on the vote of no confidence. Thirdly, it affects the composition of committees in the House of Commons. As a result, a majority of the MPs serving on this committee will necessarily be of the same political persuasion as the governing party. Fourthly, a government with the comfortable support of a majority of MPs in the House of Commons can effectively push through whatever legislation it seems necessary. In this way, House of Commons merely legitimizes and rubber stamps the wishes of the government. This can be supported by V. Bodano in the new British Constitution. The legal doctrine of the sovereignty of Parliament has thus come to legitimize a political doctrine, the doctrine that a government enjoying an overall majority in the House of Commons should enjoy virtually unlimited power. What the governing party enacts thus becomes ipso facto constitutional. Lastly, the electoral system represents the will of the electorate by conferring an inordinate amount of power on one political party that will typically form the government. Hence, we can conclude that the electoral system is crucial as it influences the stability of governments and the overall democratic legitimacy. Thanks for your precious time. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.